So
I remember when some of these older saints joined our church, there was some of them who even said to me or to other people I know, like, are you sure you guys want us here? Like they felt like almost like bad that they're like ruining our party.
Yeah.
And we were like, no. We're so glad that you're here.
Oh yeah.
And there's something cool that happened on Sunday. We had a kid get baptized. I think he's like 14. And then this guy came up who's like in his 70s and gave him a big hug. I thought, man, like they're both richer, for having this relationship.
Hey, welcome to Whitefields Community Church Sermon Extra. Great to have you with us once again this week. And I'm here with Pastor Nick Cady. He's the pastor of Whitefields Community Church here in Longmont, Colorado. And we are in our series, Equipped to Serve. And we are in Titus chapter 2, the first 8 verses. And the sermon was called How Sound Doctrine Leads to Sound Living. And we have been in a series of Paul writing his letters to Timothy and to Titus, commonly called the pastoral epistles. And it's just been a great time just to, usually these kind of, when we go through these letters, it's like we're at a conference or a leadership conference or things like that. But going through it with the church, it's been very important to see how we as a church are called to do these very things. We're all equipped to serve in whatever capacity and whatever gift God has given us. And so if you missed that sermon, whitefieldschurch.com, you can download it over there. And of course, we do have an app that you can find. If you just go, I think it's WFCC, and you will find that on the Apple Store or Google Play, and download that, and you'll be able to of course, get notified anytime our services go live. Plus, you can get any archives there as well. And, of course, any of your favorite podcasting and streaming platforms. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, just hit that subscribe and like button, and Facebook and any of your favorite podcasting platforms. And of course, rate and review, interact with it. Any way that you can interact with this content in any way, just kind of boost it up in the algorithm. And when people are looking for questions, about what does it mean? What is sound doctrine? How do I live a life affected by sound doctrine? We'll be able to provide them with Christ-centered and gospel-centered answers to their questions. And so today we just wanted to discuss maybe a couple things, just maybe elaborate a little bit more on, just your main topic, how sound doctrine leads to sound living, like the importance of what we learn and what we hear on Sunday, that it makes it to Monday, that it's assimilated into our life, that it affects change on our lives, and it's something that can be seen. And so we just wanted to elaborate on that a bit more.
Yeah, I think that what we want and what the Bible is giving us is this idea of like Jesus makes a differentiation between the Pharisees, who he calls hypocrites, and then his followers are not to be like that. Now, sometimes Christians are, called hypocrites because they believe one thing and yet it's not always lived out in their lives. Jesus clearly doesn't want us to be hypocrites, right? Now, there's a sense in which if you are always working towards an ideal, if you believe something that is true, that is perfect, then inevitably you will fall short of that. And yet, the kind of hypocrisy Jesus is talking about is where there's this kind of cognitive dissonance, right? Where you compartmentalize your life into, okay, these areas I do this and these areas I do that. I remember a good example of this would be like this guy in Hungary that I knew. I remember we were talking once about faith and how it affects your work. And he said, yeah, but church is church and work is work. In other words, different rules apply, right? Like, so when I go to church, yeah, sure, I'm all about nodding my head, loving your neighbors, and, believing that God's sufficient. But when it comes to work, different rules apply. In other words, the stuff we talked about in church, I don't necessarily need to follow those things. Another good example of this kind of thing would be like if you ever watch the Godfather movies, right? It's like all these guys murdering each other, and then they go to church.
And christening.
And they're incredibly pious, right? And
You have rules like you never do somebody on a Sunday, right? Like you don't cap anybody on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Like we've got to have rules here, guys.
Yeah, there's got to be some sort of standard. But I guess that's my point is that like for many people, like what you do at church or what you study in the Bible, they say, yeah, that's all well and good. But when it comes to real life, you got to be practical. And what we're saying is that what Jesus taught, what we see in the New Testament, and of course in the Old Testament as well, is not a compartmentalized life, rather a life of integrity. And what integrity means is that you're the same. You're the same at church and as you go out from here. Now, of course, that's not an excuse to be a carnal person at church. What it is to say the things that you learn here, apply them in every area of your life and live them out for real. And you know what? Sometimes that's going to cost you, which is what this guy was talking about when he says church is church, but work is work. Is if I apply these things in my work, it's going to cost me more money, right? I'm going to be less profitable. And that's exactly the point. That, yeah, there might be some areas where this is not expedient in the short term, but we do believe that it matters in the big picture. It honors God, and ultimately it does help people, and it shapes the world that we live in. So I was just thinking about that, and you could put it this way, that we're shaped by the gospel. And what it means to be shaped by the gospel is, think about it like this. What the gospel is it's a message of truth, right? So the gospel message, evangelion in Greek, what it means is that it's a proclamation of something that has happened. Now, you can't do anything to make it happen or to undo what happened. It happened, the end. But you can be a messenger of that, right? You can be a proclaimer of that. And so it's kind of like the difference between, one person put it this way. He said it's like the difference between messengers who give you like advice on how to fight a war versus somebody who gives you a declaration of what has happened of good news. So let's say, you get some people who come to you from a far off country and they tell you, hey, the battle was fought and won and we have the victory. Or people who come to you as military strategists and say, if you want to have victory, here's what you need to do. Now, what's interesting is like with the gospel, we get this message of what has been done. The battle's been fought and it's been won. And now in light of that, we now live differently because we know that the victory has been won. What's interesting is that we might end up doing the same things, right? So somebody who says, hey, you need to keep the 10 Commandments in order for God to accept you. That person's going to try really hard to keep the 10 Commandments. But a person who says, hey, God has done this for you, therefore behold the God who loves you, you might also want to keep the 10 Commandments in light of who God is, but you're doing it now for a very different reason. And I think that's really important as we talk about this. One thing I mentioned on Sunday, which I really hope people grasp and get, is this concept that whenever we get moral imperatives from God, like when God says, do this, don't do that, those things are always rooted in something about who God is and what God has done. And that's why we do those things, right? So when he says, don't have sex outside of marriage, when he says, don't lie, cheat, or steal in order to get ahead, when he says whatever else he might say, understand the reason for those things is not just like an arbitrary rule that just kind of came out of nowhere. No, that is rooted in something that's true about God, something that's true about what he's done and the implications of that for the future. And so I think that is really key. So like we talked a lot about addiction. I got a lot of comments about not just addiction, but escapism and behaviors. Again, the reason why God says, don't be a slave to much wine or whatever substance or behavior that is, it isn't because God says, oh, I hate it when they're drinking that wine and, or it isn't even if you do that, you might do something stupid. Now that's also true. But it's because what you're doing in there is you're hijacking the thing that God wants to use in your life to bring you closer to him and to shape you into the person he wants you to be. You're saying, nope, I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to escape this. I'm going to hide from it. And that's really the issue there. You're looking to other things rather than looking to God in the situation in which he's trying to shape you.
Yeah, no, that's so key, and I guess that's probably the essence of faith is believing that God's promises are true, that His word is true, that His way is the right way, His wisdom is the right wisdom, and to kind of put that into practice, that we live a different way, and we have to make that choice in a world that's many times, as you mentioned, it's going the opposite direction, and we have to decide that what God has said, I'm going to stay that route no matter what the cost.
Some people have said that faith, the essence of faith, is trusting God enough to do what He says. So I agree with you. Like, faith is taking God at His word, but it can't just be theoretical, right? So it also has to be trusting God enough to do what He says. And I think that that's really important here.
Yeah, extremely important. We also talked about generations. Paul kind of dials down into the generational gaps, of course, the generation, that he was, of course, ministering to various people, that were coming to faith from all kinds of backgrounds, age groups, and things like that. And old men, need to be discipling young men, old women discipling the younger women, and so that's an interesting conversation. We here at Whitefields we have a wide variety of age groups, and that's just something really important to talk about.
Yeah, I've had my own experiences with like older people pouring into me, and what was some of your experiences you've had?
Oh, for certain. Like, well, I mean, I think I've spoken about my father before as as somebody who has poured into me, and I've really gleaned from those around me, and I've attempted to receive, to see the wisdom of those that are older than me, that have been around, have been there, done that, and to listen and pay attention. I've learned a lot of good life lessons just by picking up on things that somebody said, that has been there, done that, and applied that. Isn't that what we've kind of been talking about? Just that taking that doctrine, that application, hearing it applied, hearing the experience of it applied, and then putting it into practice, and this whole generational question. I think it's you brought up on Sunday just the idea of music, and have kind of quoted me on that. And from my perspective, I've been in the worship ministry since goodness knows, since I was a young kid, but in full-time ministry since 1996, and just seeing how music can be such a divisive thing within a church congregation and within a generational thing, and it was something that I counted quite a bit in working in Hungary when I was there as a missionary, and many times being called out to some of these more conservative, you would say historical churches that were trying to make a transition, trying to accept their youth and try and assimilate the youth into the services, and they were, it was growing pains. It was just a very unique time in Hungary when we were there, and a lot of the new music and all this kind of stuff, and I just I saw how music was such a dividing tool, like that Satan was using it to create just a sense of bitterness between generations. And I remember being at a worship conference, and I was on a panel, and somebody, a young person, they're all young people there, somebody asked me, so what do we do about all these old people? They're always grumbling and complaining about our music, and they don't like it, this and that. And my answer to them was, one day these people are going to all die. And I said, what are you going to bring to the table? What are you doing in your generation to further the gospel? And what are you doing to love the next generation and receive from the next generation? And so, I think it was kind of shocking. But that's kind of how the way I saw it. I just saw that music is something that we should not divide over. It should unite us. And when we come together on Sunday morning, we want to be able to, at least for me, I want to look out at the congregation and say, how can I get this entire group of people united around the one theme of Christ crucified, the gospel, and the victory, in his resurrection and ascension, and that we're all part of that. How can we unite around these gospel truths? And so that's what drives my songs that we're picking from. And, I've been around for a while, so I'm picking from, decades. And then, of course, a lot of the great hymns that have been passed on to us through the ages that have great gospel truths. And it's a difficult thing, each week to be able to, a lot of people just got born again, last week. They have no clue about, come thou fount of every blessing. They're like, why are we speaking Shakespearean in church? So I'm trying to speak to them, but then I'm speaking to those dear saints that have been singing these songs since, they were, 10 years old, and it's so dear and, to their hearts. And I want to be able to minister to them as well, and so, as you said on Sunday, my heart is that this is, that it's a time for us, for the young people, the young generation, to love the older generation by embracing their songs and learning their songs, and for the older generation to embrace the younger generation by learning their songs, and us joining together in worshiping the Lord as one, body of Christ. And because, as we saw on Sunday with Youth Takeover, we have such a great next generation that's coming up, and they're so solid, and you want to encourage them, but we want them also to be listening and saying, lead us, show us, guide us. How does the gospel work out in your life, and how can we learn? And so I think it's difficult though. Music is very stylistic. It's very tied to who we are. It's tied to where we were when we heard things. It's tied to, I don't know how many times I've had people come up to me after, and they'll give me a song idea, or they'll give me a book or something like that, and they'll say, if you sing this song, it's going to be, the whole church is going to, big revival, and inevitably that was the song that they were listening to when they got saved, and I know the songs I would listen to when I, that really shaped my childhood. And so, you've got to bring all of that into, into a church congregation where there's the old and the young, and we want them serving one another, and of course serving the Lord together. So
I remember when some of these older saints joined our church, there was some of them who even said to me or to other people I know, like, are you sure you guys want us here? Like, they felt like almost like bad that they're like ruining our party.
Yeah.
And we were like, no. We're so glad that you're here.
Oh yeah.
And there's something cool that happened on Sunday. We had a kid get baptized. I think he's like 14. And then this guy came up who's like in his 70s and gave him a big hug. And I thought, man, like, they're both richer, for having this relationship. And what a cool picture. And I got a picture of you in our back room before service praying with the youth worship team. I thought that was pretty good. Maybe we might even be able to put that in this video. But I thought that was really cool. You got these kids leaning in while you're reading something to them. And I thought that's what it's all about, right? That's what we're talking about. The younger generation, learning from the older generation, serving the older generation embracing and encouraging the younger generation, and everybody's better off. Like, what a mistake to split up the congregation.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. I know that's probably controversial, but I think it's such a mistake to divide congregations by traditional and contemporary. And, I know my dad, like, they have, the church he goes to, they have a traditional and they have a contemporary service. And he was asked by the pastor of the traditional, he's like, oh, I love seeing you in there with the contemporary service. And he's like, my dad's like, I got to be with these young people. I got to be where, I want to see how God's moving in the next generation and be a part of all of that, and he's in his 70s as well. And so, I think that those two groups have to be together. I don't think you see anywhere in the Bible it says, you will be divided along your musical styles. It just doesn't. We come together, and we worship together, and we find a way, across all of that to unite together behind one vision and one cause, and that's the gospel, and whatever God's called us to do as a church. And so that's important. Just as a funny, I remember we were during rehearsal with the kids one time. It was probably last year sometime, and we were just playing, and I think it was In Christ Alone we did on that, and I stopped playing, and then everybody stopped playing. I said, you guys can't stop playing when I stop playing. I said, I'm going to die one day, and you guys are going to take over. And they were like, super, surprised. But that, that's what we're doing. I'm not, I'm not going to be leading this forever. These are the next people, and I want to be taking all the things God's taught me over the years and pouring it into them, because they're one day going to be pouring it into the next group.
Yeah, I mentioned millennials on Sunday because I had gone to this forum about like how to minister to millennials, but now nobody's talking about that anymore, right? Because guess what? You wait a few years and these kids aren't kids anymore.
No.
And millennials aren't young anymore. That's already happened. I'm a millennial, actually, and look at me. Gosh. Yeah. and you know what I'm saying? Like, pretty soon Gen Z is going to be, graduating from school, and they're going to be parents and things like that. I mean, it happens very quickly. It would be foolish to neglect, people in any age group, because this thing moves pretty fast.
Yeah, soon we're going to be the ones grumbling about the style of the youngins coming after us.
Next generation.
Listen to that. So,
yeah, I mean, there's this famous line, I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again, like from The Breakfast Club, the movie, where the principal, he's complaining to the janitor, and he's talking about, the kids these days, when I was a kid, it was different. And the janitor says to him this great line, he says, man, the kids haven't changed. You've changed, They're the same, like in some way. I mean, yeah, sure, the things that they do are different, going to be different in various places at various times. But, I mean, you're basically not accomplishing anything by just like writing them off or complaining. Like, that's what I said. Let's not be those who sit back and grumble. Let's be those who step up and serve.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just a great way to end this podcast. And yeah, just some great things, just important that our doctrine leads to walking it out, And it's not, one thing to have good doctrine and one thing to have a good living. And so just some great thoughts there for you to think about and chew on as we go continue next week with this particular series. And we hope to see you again. God bless.